Hi there. How's everyone? My name is Gena Golden. We're in Atlanta, Georgia. I am an LCSW. I am also a certified hypnotherapist. I have a private practice here in Atlanta. It's called Inner Coach Counseling. So what am I talking to you about today? I am talking to you about the inner critic, right? I love doing trainings and teaching and explaining about the inner critic. And I believe that most of us have an inner critic. I used to say all, but what I've come to realize is that some people have an inner critic that sounds like a voice, while other people may have an inner critic that they sense or feel. It's not necessarily a voice or a chatterbox, but it's a sense that something is wrong. It's a sense of self-doubt. It's a sense of putting yourself down, degradation or belittling, right? So some people have a voice that chops you down every time you try to take a new direction or to study something different or to do something different or to put yourself out there or take initiative. Some people's inner critic hold them back. The inner critic is really a subconscious belief about how we feel about ourselves, and it may or may not be true. And most times it isn't true. Sometimes it comes from a time in your life or from a very significant event, and that event led to a particular belief, right? And then that belief led to particular behaviors that you may have. And then those behaviors lead to the results that you might see showing up in your life if you're stuck in self-criticism and judgment and self-deprecation. So the inner critic is something to be slayed. It is something to get rid of, because if not, it can hold you back in ways that you're not even aware of. In fact, I've worked with clients that they didn't even know they had an inner critic until it was brought to their conscious awareness. And then they were able to deal with it head on. Because when things reside in our subconscious mind, it drives our actions, our thoughts, and our behaviors, and even our feelings. So much so that we don't recognize that it's there. And we wonder why we can't lose the weight, or we can't find a good date, or we can't succeed, or we don't get the promotion, or we don't pass the licensure exam, right? Because the inner critic holds us back. It keeps us from our greatness. It keeps us from those small things that we want to do, right? Your greatness may not be my greatness and vice versa, right? But the inner critic will cause you to compare yourself to others. And we know comparison is the thief of joy, right? So we know that if comparison is the thief of joy, you can imagine what self-criticism is. And so the inner critic will keep us criticizing ourselves. And it also keeps us criticizing others and condemning others and judging others. So there's not one person I've ever met who judges others harshly, who doesn't judge themselves harshly, and vice versa. So when you find that you're judging people harshly, criticizing them, condemning them, finding fault with them, forgetting that they are not their mistakes and accusing them, right? It is very likely that you're doing that to yourself. It's very likely that that is the style of communication and self-acceptance that you've had growing up. For some reason you can't stop it. You can't figure out how to make it go away. You can't figure out how to control your thoughts and your actions and your beliefs and your feelings, right? And so the inner critic can be a major part of our lives. The inner critic can be this pathological voice, feeling, sensation, intuitiveness that doesn't support you in any way, right? But how many of us really have that? How many of us are aware that we may have an inner critic? versus how many of us have it, but we're just not aware. But we can't figure out why we always have money problems or relationship problems or family problems or career problems or test taking problems, right? Sometimes it's what we say to ourselves repeatedly, relentlessly, nonstop is the problem. And I call that the inner critic, right? The inner pathological critic. We all have one. Like I said, some are loud and shouting from the rooftops, while others is just a quiet, brooding sensation about how we feel about who we are. Inner critic gets its fuel from the cognitive distortions. Some of us have very clear cognitive distortions that we can stand up and say, yeah, I do that. I see myself doing that. I know that I have black and white thinking. I know that I look at the world as either this way or that way, black or white, right or wrong, right? Up or down. There is no middle ground. That's a cognitive distortion. And the inner critic loves those distortions. The inner critic loves it when we generalize and we make sweeping generalizations about people, places, and things. The inner critic loves the other thing that we do where we catastrophize. We catastrophize and say, oh, my friend is 10 minutes late. They're not going to come. They're standing me up. They never come. I always get stood up, right? Catastrophizing a situation is another cognitive distortion, and the inner critic just loves it. It's yummy. It's food to the inner critic. It confirms for you what you already think you believe is true about yourself. So part of the challenge of overcoming the cognitive distortions, the personal lies that we've been telling ourselves, the pathological inner critic, part of that is to uncover it, to see it for what it is, to realize that it's a problem and you want to get rid of it, right? But you must sit with yourself and acknowledge that you may or may not be experiencing it. And if this is not you, great. I congratulate you. That means that someone did something right, And I love that because, again, this is not affecting everyone, but it does affect a lot of folks. A lot of folks. And some people are just too embarrassed to admit it to themselves. Some people didn't even know it exists. Some people don't want to put words to it or don't know how to put words to it, right? I think that as a psychotherapist, a licensed clinical social worker, most of our clients, we're dealing with the thought process. We're dealing with the cognitive processing of human beings. We're dealing with also the neurological part of human beings, the brain science that says that within our brains, there is a limbic system that, and that's part of the emotional brain. Some people say we have a reptilian brain where it's an older part of our brain at the back of our brain that was developed thousands and thousands of years when we were a different type of people. We were a different type of human. We had to survive day to day, right? So the back of the brain stem was developed to keep us safe. And one of the ways that it kept us safe was to remind us of all the things that can go wrong, right? If we can remember that there is a snake over in that berry bush, or that there is a wild animal just beyond that tree over there. You go over there, you may get eaten. So that part of the brain needed to remind us of this. And it did it by constantly reminding us of what can go wrong, because your life depended on not having things go wrong, right? Back then, early humans survived or they got eaten. And so your brain developed to protect you. And what happens is the old brain, the old reptilian brain in the limbic system at the base of the brain became a dominant force, or is a dominant force in a lot of people's lives. And it's a very prehistoric part of the brain that will make you remember what can go wrong in your life. That will cause you to remember all the times that you were stood up, all the guys that treated you wrong, all the girls that treated you wrong, right? All the jobs that didn't honor and respect you, all this and all that, right? Your brain is going to help you to remember those things. And that part becomes this inner critic to keep you from getting hurt, to keep you from danger. But what it fails to realize is that you now have a prefrontal cortex that has executive functioning and executive abilities to be able to make clear decisions. This is the CEO of the brain. But if you let the limbic part of the brain dictate what's going on, you're steeped in worry, doubt, fear, and your inner critic takes over. The amygdala in your brain gets ignited because the amygdala is the fear-based part of the brain. So everything is being ignited and energized and causing you to fight or flee or freeze. And so the inner critic is all entangled into all of that, right? Speaking to you with words or feelings or sensations, and it causes you to get stuck, right? And so my work includes helping people to understand the inner workings of the brain science called neuroscience, and how we can shift and shape and create new pathways in our brain called neuroplasticity, right? So that's part of my work. You know, I'm also a trained neuroscience coach through a training to learn the inner workings of the brain, of the sympathetic nervous system, of the parasympathetic nervous system, of the amygdala, of the limbic system, right? The basal ganglia, sorts of prefrontal cortex, all sorts of elements and parts of the body that run our emotions, that run our logic, that ignites our fear, right? So I believe that when I empower my clients to understand what's happening, the physiological part of their brain that's creating norepinephrine and cortisol and adrenaline to cascade through their body, causing them not to really think clearly, but to allow the inner critic to run their lives. And then that creates a wiring in the brain that wires them up to be a certain way and to see the world in a certain way. My job is to help them unlock and unblock and get unstuck with that. Right? So I just wanted to talk to you all about that and the power of our brains, that we do have neuroplasticity, that just because we've been thinking and operating the same way for years doesn't mean that we can't rewire our brain and to get rid of the inner critic once and for all. And I wish each and every one of you much success. Take care.